The prose Edda names Odin's mother in half a sentence, and almost nobody reads it twice. She is called Bestla. Her father is called Bölþorn. Bölþorn is a jötunn, which means the chief of the Norse gods on his mother's side, is a giant. So is Thor, whose mother Jörð comes down out of a line. The texts run back into Jötunheimar. So is Thor's son Magni, born by the giantess Járnsaxa. So is Vidar, son of Grida. Njordr's wife walked down out of the mountains in her father's armor to collect a debt in blood, and was afterwards counted among the goddesses without a note of explanation. And the ground every one of them is standing on, the poems say it plainly, is the body of a giant the gods cut into pieces, with the fence around human Middle-earth built out of his eyebrows. None of which is the story on offer if you go looking for giants in the modern sense. The lost kind, the bones in the ground, the one somebody is supposedly hiding. That is a different book, written long after these texts and built on different premises. It is not in this corpus, and this corpus is stranger than it is. This is every jötunn the Norse texts name, who they are, what they have, and what happened each time the gods went to take it. And it is the case, argued from the poems and from a century of scholarship, that in Norse myth, giant was never a kind of creature at all. It was a side. Flesh became earth, blood became the sea, bones became the mountains. Grimnismal sets it down as an inventory, the way a builder accounts for materials at the end of a job, and it does not pause once to be amazed at itself. The teeth and the shattered jaw became rocks and boulders in Snorri's fuller prose telling. The skull became the sky, not collapsed over the world, not floating free, but held up at its four corners by dwarfs, whom Gylfaginning names Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Vestri, the four directions given hands. The brains, flung upward, became the clouds. Nothing is left over. The body is used up entirely, and what it is used up into is the world. The body is Ymir's. He is the first being the texts know, and the corpus cannot quite agree what to call him. Vafthrudnismal calls him Aurgelmir, and says he arose from the venom drops of the river Elivagar before the earth existed. Snorri's prose calls him Ymir, and adds that he was fed by 4 rivers of milk running from the udder of the primeval cow Audumbla. Other names surface in the older catalogues, and scholars disagree about whether those names belong to him or to somebody else entirely. Simic records the identification as the standard reading rather than the settled one. Even the dwarfs come out of him. Gylfaginning says they first quickened like maggots in Ymir's flesh, and were given human understanding and shape afterwards, with Völuspá supplying their names in a catalogue of its own. What is not in dispute anywhere is the dismemberment itself, and then the fence. Gylfaginning says the gods raised a wall around Midgard, the world of men, out of Ymir's eyebrows, and says why, as a protection against the hostility of the giants, not built to resemble a boundary, not carved or painted to look like one, built out of the actual substance of the thing it was raised against. Read the catalogue back as geography, and the effect is uncanny rather than grand. A ridgeline is a jaw. A valley is a wound that never closed. The boulders at the foot of a scree slope are teeth in Snorri's telling, broken out and scattered where they landed. The 4 corners of the sky are load-bearing, and 4 named dwarfs are underneath them holding the weight. None of this is decoration. It is an account of where the material came from, itemized, as though somebody had to sign for the delivery. That is where the argument of this episode starts, because it produces an anomaly the standard reading cannot absorb. That reading pictures Norse myth as a wall between 2 kinds of being. Here the gods, self-evidently gods, and over there, separated by geography and by nature, the giants, a taxonomy, the elect and the other. But the cosmogony refuses that picture with a single architectural detail. The gods did not build a world and then discover Jotnar waiting outside it. They built the world out of a jötunn, and then built the fence against Jotnar out of the same jötunn. The wall is not a fortress against a foreign country. It is a line drawn through a single body, which means it is not a natural boundary at all and can only be held the way a drawn line is held, by force, continuously, by somebody willing to walk it. One piece of counter-evidence sits here and deserves an honest answer rather than a clever one. Vafthrudnismal records something genuinely strange about Ymir's own generation. A son and a daughter grew together under the arm of the frost giant, and foot begat with foot a six-headed son, with no second parent anywhere in the account. That is asexual generation, a category difference of exactly the kind you would expect if the Jotnar were another order of being reproductively sealed off from the gods. But look at where that detail sits. It sits at the origin of everything, in the cosmogonic instant, before there were two categories to be distinguished from one another, and every jötunn named after Ymir in the surviving texts reproduces sexually, very often with a god. The asexual birth is a statement about how the world began. It is not a statement about what a kind of being is, and it never happens again. The corpus is consistent about that afterwards in a way it is not consistent about much else. Every union this episode will run through, Bestla with Bor, Jörð with Odin, Skadi with Njörður, Gerda with Freyja, Járnsaxa with Thor, Grida with Odin, is an ordinary union producing children who live, marry, inherit, and in two cases outlive the world. Whatever the first being was, his way of generating offspring is not a property any of his descendants keep. A trait that appears once at the origin of everything, and never once again across the entire surviving corpus, is not a diagnostic feature of a kind of being. It is a fact about a beginning, then the killing. Gylfaginning says Odin and his brothers, the sons of Bor, struck Ymir down, and that so much blood came out of the wounds that it drowned nearly all the kin of the frost giants. Nearly all. One household came through it, and the corpus's own ending turns on that survival, which is where this episode will end too. For now the point is structural, and the texts make it without commentary. Every mountain the gods walk on is a jötunn's bone. Every sea they sail is a jötunn's blood. The sky over their halls is a jötunn's skull, and the fence protecting men from Jotnar is a jötunn's face. If the two sides were two kinds, the corpus buried the evidence in a very odd place, inside the material of the world itself. And this is not one eccentric poem making an odd claim that a better witness would tidy away. Terville Petra's survey treats the dismemberment as one of the best attested creation narratives in the Eddic material, precisely because it stands independently in two poems before Snorri ever combined them, which makes it about as close to a fixed point as anything in this corpus gets. The strangeness is not a copying accident. It is in the foundation, and every later story about a fence, a hammer, and an enemy is built on top of it. So the world is a giant, which raises the question the rest of this episode is about. If the gods are the ones who cut him up, what exactly are the gods? And what is a jötunn, if not a different kind of thing? The answer starts somewhere unexpected. It starts with the fact that the word giant is not in these texts at all. 4 words. That is what the Old Norse texts have, where English has one, and they are not interchangeable. Jötunn is the first and the most common, the word that carries this episode. The medieval dictionary of Cleesby and Vigfússon glosses it as a mythological being, a giant of the frost giant kind, and records nothing about size as its defining sense. Thurs is a separate headword entirely, glossed as a giant or demon, used of hostile supernatural beings. De Vries notes it is cognate with the rune name Thurisaz, an independent Germanic strand with its own history. Risi is the one term in the set that reliably does mean large, a being of great stature, and the dictionary says so directly. Bergrisi is a compound, rock giant or mountain giant, denoting a subtype rather than standing in as a generic synonym. And around those four sit others, the same flattening swallows. Geiger, the standard word for a female jötunn, distinct from trollkona, and troll itself, which the dictionary glosses across a wide range of supernatural beings that overlap with the Jotnar without being the same thing. 6 words, then, where English offers one, and the corpus deploys them differently depending on what it wants a reader to understand. A thurs is a thing you keep out. A risi is a thing that is big. A bergrisi is a thing that is big and belongs to the rocks. A geiger is a woman of that kin, and the texts have a separate word again for a troll woman, which tells you the categories were fine-grained enough to need one. The one word that does none of that sorting is the word this episode is about. Zimek's dictionary states the consequence plainly. There is no single Old Norse word that consistently means a very large humanoid being. The corpus uses these terms across figures of wildly varying implied stature, and only Risi reliably signals size at all. The etymology of jötunn is where the internet is most confident, and the philology least. One proposal connects it to eating, to devouring, and it is repeated everywhere as though it was settled. De Vries records it as one derivation among competitors, and does not treat it as decided. Zimek's entry says the same thing from the other direction. Several proposals exist, and no consensus has been reached. Scholars disagree, the point remains open, and the honest version of this beat is that nobody knows. It matters because the assumption of size is not a harmless flourish. It changes what a reader thinks every scene is about. If a jötunn is by definition enormous, then a marriage across the boundary is grotesque. A wisdom contest is a curiosity, and a hall full of them is a menagerie. If the word carries no size at all, and the dictionary entry for jötunn records none, then a marriage is a marriage, a contest is a contest, and a hall is a hall belonging to somebody. The same scenes, read twice, with one English word deciding which reading a person gets. Jackson Crawford has made the popular-facing statement of the underlying point in a lecture. Translating jötunn as giant imports into English a connotation of size the Old Norse word does not carry, and the philology behind that observation is older than the lecture. It is a lecture, not a book, and it is worth being exact about that, because the argument does not need inflating to hold. Watch the texts do the distinguishing themselves. The master builder who contracts to raise the god's fortification enters the story as an ordinary party to a negotiation. He is described in generic terms while he is negotiating. Then his deception comes apart, and at that precise moment, Snorri reaches for a different word. He calls him a bergrisi, not a generic jötunn, not a hostile thurs. The size-specific compound produced at the exact point in the plot where size has become the relevant fact. The corpus is keeping a distinction that English translation has spent centuries dissolving. And the distinction is not lexical bookkeeping. In the surviving material, a jötunn can be a bride, a host, a teacher, a builder under contract, an in-law, or a body on a dueling ground, and one word covers all of it. Torvill Petra's survey makes the same observation from the poetic side. The term spreads across figures of highly variable character and stature, consistent with what the dictionaries record. That is not how a word for a species behaves. A species word narrows as you use it. This one widens. There is one more overlap worth naming before moving on, because it becomes load-bearing much later in this episode. The dictionary glosses troll across a wide range of supernatural beings that historically overlap with the Jotnar without ever being synonymous with them. 2 words, 2 ranges, a shared border, and centuries of English handling both of them carelessly, which produces the modern reader's problem, and it is not really the reader's fault. Hearing Norse giants and picturing a vanished kind of oversized beings is not a mistake about Norse myth. It is an accurate reading of an English word that was never Norse. This episode's reading is that the popular equation of the Jotnar with a lost tribe of huge bodies is an artifact of translation and not a claim anybody can find in an Old Norse text. So once, without a lecture, there are no such remains in this corpus. No bones in the ground, no vanished civilization, no hidden discovery, no memory of some real oversized population walking the fjords. Nothing in the Poetic Edda or Snorri's Edda describes any of it. That entire genre was written long after these manuscripts, on premises the medieval texts do not share. It is not what this episode is about, and this episode will not mention it again. What the corpus we have is actually shaped to say is simpler and considerably stranger. Here is a word that names a class of being without naming a size. Here are 4 words where English hands you one. Here is a boundary that is real and enforced and is not a wall between species, which leaves the question of what it is a wall between, which leaves a question answered in half a line at the head of a genealogy and never returned to again. Bestla. That is the name, and it is very nearly everything the texts give her. Gylfaginning opens the genealogy of the Aesir with a clean sequence. Buri was licked free from the salty ice blocks by the primeval cow Audumbla and emerged alone. His son was Bor. Bor married a woman named Bestla, the daughter of the jötunn Bölþorn. From that marriage came 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. That is the whole of it. A woman appears, marries, bears the chief of the gods, and leaves the record. Beyond her name, her father's name, and the marriage and birth notice, no surviving narrative gives her a line of speech, an action, or a scene of her own. Now count the ancestry in the order the corpus gives it. Buri stands alone. In the entire genealogy Gylfaginning provides for the Aesir, he is the only named ancestor who is not a jötunn or descended from one. Every generation after him runs through a jötunn on the mother's side. 1. That is the whole of the non-jötunn stock in the family tree of the gods who spend the rest of the corpus killing Jotnar. Odin is not half anything at a comfortable distance. His mother's father is a jötunn, named as such in the same text that gives the genealogy. Put that in the plainest domestic form the material allows, and it becomes difficult to unhear. The being who kills the first jötunn builds a world out of him, and raises a fence against his surviving kin is himself that kin, a jötunn's grandson on his mother's side, and in Havamal, the pupil of a jötunn uncle. Gylfaginning does not present this as a scandal or a secret or a paradox requiring management. It presents it as the opening entry in the record before any of the rest of it happens. The pattern does not stop at the first generation, and this is where it becomes structural rather than anecdotal. Thor's mother is Jörð, whom Snorri's Edda and the skaldic tradition name as one of Odin's consorts. Jörð's own line runs backward through Not, the night being, to Nörfi. And the text is specific about Nörfi, a jötunn, dwelling in Jötunheimar. So the god the corpus credits with the longest giant-killing career descends on his mother's side from the country he spends his life raiding. Then the generation below. Skaldskaparmal records that Thor's son Magni was born to the giantess Járnsaxa. Gylfaginning records Vidar as the son of Odin and the giantess Grida. There is a third case that gets quoted alongside those two, and it should not be. Gylfaginning names Vali as the son of Odin and Rinda, but the surviving sources do not consistently call Rinda a jötunn. Snorri's account does not label her, and other medieval registers present a differently classified figure under a similar name. Because Magni's and Vidar's mothers are named as giantesses securely, and Rinda's classification is not, this episode says only that at least 2 of the named survivors of the last generation are the sons of giantesses, not 3. The claim is smaller, and it is true, which is worth sitting with for a moment because of where those 2 names end up. Magni and Vidar are among the handful of figures the corpus carries past the ending of everything, and the securely recorded fact about both of them is their mothers, Járnsaxa and Grida, giantesses named as such. Whatever the gods were defending, the part of it that survives is half jötunn on the maternal side, and the texts hand that over without a flicker of discomfort. What the genealogies do not permit at any point is a clean separation. Christopher Abrams' survey places these marriages inside a broader pattern of exogamous alliance running through the corpus's genealogical logic, not a series of scandals requiring explanation one at a time, but the way the line is built. Schiot makes the same structural observation about succession. Marriage across the Aesir, jötunn line recurs as a feature of how the generations are produced, not as an aberration. The corpus is not embarrassed by this. It simply records it and moves on to the next killing. Return to Bestla, because the title of this episode promises her, and the texts hand over almost nothing. She is the most consequential woman in the whole origin account. She married into the line that would make the world, and she bore the being who cut Ymir apart. And she does not speak. She does not choose. She does not appear in any scene. The temptation is to invent her a personality out of the gaps, and this episode will not do it, because the absence is more interesting than any invention would be. Gylfaginning kept the genealogy and threw the person away. It preserved exactly what a family tree requires: a name, a father, a marriage, a birth, and preserved nothing else. That silence is not unique to her, and it is not squeamishness on the part of the texts. The women who marry into the divine line are recorded at the level of the transaction. Whose daughter, whose wife, whose mother. What they wanted, what they thought of the arrangements made around them. Whether they agreed, the corpus mostly does not say, because the corpus is a record of powers, births, and the architecture of the world, rather than of interior lives. Some of the giantesses in this episode do get deeds and speech. Skadi arrives armed and negotiates her own terms. Bestla gets none of it. And the absence is the interesting part, because it is the absence at the exact hinge of the whole genealogy. She has one further appearance, and it is oblique. Havamal says that Odin learned 9 mighty songs from the famous son of Bölþorn from his mother's brother. The poem does not name Bestla in the stanza. It does not need to. The kinship is doing the work. The chief god's mother had a brother, and that uncle held knowledge worth the price Odin paid for it. The maternal line does not merely supply the gods with mothers. It supplies them with teachers. So the genealogy stands as the texts give it, unadorned and slightly absurd. One non-jötunn ancestor, and then jötunn on the mother's side, generation after generation, down through the chief gods and into their sons. There is no way to sort the Aesir from the Jotnar by blood, because the blood is the same blood, and the corpus is the thing that says so. If the gods are Jotnar on their mother's side in every generation, then whatever separates the two sides is not descent. The texts are remarkably consistent about what it actually is, and it shows up first in who is permitted to marry whom, and in what happens to anyone who asks in the wrong direction. Skadi came to Asgard in armor. Her father Thiazi had been killed by the gods, and kinship law entitled her to payment, so she arrived at their gates armed for war to collect it. Not as a supplicant, as a creditor. That word matters because it sets the register for everything else in this beat. Wergild is not mercy, and it is not a gift. It is the price a killing carries under kinship law, owed by the killers to the dead man's people, and payable or answerable in blood. Skaldskaparmal has her arrive to collect it in her father's war gear, at the gate of the people who owed it. The gods do not treat the demand as illegitimate. They treat it as a bill. The gods answered with terms, and the terms are worth hearing in full because they are so strange. She could take a husband from among them, chosen by looking at feet alone, with the rest of each god hidden. She had to be made to laugh, and her father's eyes were to be set in the sky as stars. She looked at the feet, chose the finest pair, believing them to be Baldur's, and got Njordr. The marriage was then split between his home at Norton and hers at Thrymheimar, neither able to live where the other needed to be. An unhappy settlement, but a settlement, and afterwards, when Gylfaginning lists the Asingir, the goddesses of the Aesir, Skadi is in the list, by name, with no qualifying note, no asterisk, nothing marking her as differently made from the rest. The second marriage is not a negotiation at all. Skirnismal records Freyr's courtship of Gerda, the daughter of the jötunn Guimir, conducted entirely by proxy through his servant Skirnir. Gifts are offered and refused. Persuasion is offered and refused. And when both fail, Skirnir turns to threat, a curse of isolation and a degrading marriage laid on her until she agrees to meet Freyr at an appointed time. The poem puts the curse in explicitly runic terms, runes cut and then cursed, to be erased only if she relents. She agrees. The poem records the coercion in its own words, without apology and without mitigation, and this episode will neither sensationalize it nor smooth it away, because the coercion is evidence. The inbound valve is not always consensual. It is, however, always inbound. Set the two side by side, and the difference is structural rather than moral. Skadi arrives with a claim, an armed escort of one, and the law behind her. She gets terms, a husband and a place on the list of goddesses. Gerda makes no claim, holds no debt, and has done nothing at all. She is courted at a distance by a god she has never met, and then threatened until she yields. One is a settlement between rival kin groups with claims on each other. The other is a god getting what he wants. What the two have in common is the direction of travel, and in this corpus, the direction of travel is the rule. Now run the other direction and watch what happens. An unnamed builder contracts with the gods to raise their fortification within a single winter. His price is Freya, and the sun, and the moon. Gylfaginning records the contract in those terms, and Völuspá glances at the episode obliquely. The work goes faster than the gods expected. The builder's jötunn nature comes out, and Thor kills him rather than let the contract be honored. The wall was worth having. The price was not payable, and the difference between those two facts is a corpse. It is worth noticing what was on the table there, because it is the largest demand in the corpus. Not a bride alone. Freya, the sun and the moon, written into a contract the gods agreed to, and then found themselves losing. They did not renegotiate. they did not pay part of it. Once the builder was revealed for what he was, the agreement stopped being an agreement, and Thor settled it with the hammer. Thrymskvida opens with Thor waking to find his hammer gone and reporting the theft to Loki before any demand has even been made. The demand comes. Thrymr has Mjolnir and will return it in exchange for Freya as his bride. The gods refuse to hand her over. They dress Thor as the bride instead, and once the hammer is laid in his lap, he kills Thrymr and the assembled wedding company. Hrungnir does not steal anything. He is given hospitality, admitted to Asgard under safe conduct, and handed drink by the gods themselves, and then announces from inside their hall that he will carry off Valhall and kill every god except Freya and Sif, whom he intends to keep. He is answered with a duel, and the duel kills him. 3 demands for an Asynja, 3 refusals, 3 dead Jotnar. This direction is not this episode's discovery, and the honest thing is to say whose it is. Margaret Clooney's Ross argued in Prolonged Echoes that the exchange relationship between Aesir and Jotnar runs one way only. Jotun women are taken into the Aesir community, while Asynja are never given to Jotnar in return, and that the killing of Ymir, the god's own kinsman on the mother's side, is the act by which the gods first separate themselves from the Jotnar at all. That is her reading, published in 1994, and the shape of this beat belongs to her. Her second point is the sharper one, and it reaches back to where this episode started. The killing of Ymir is not the gods repelling an outsider. It is the gods killing their own kinsman on the mother's side, and that act on her reading is the moment the Aesir constitute themselves as a separate party at all. The separation does not precede the violence and license it. The violence performs the separation. Everything afterwards, the marriages and the refusals alike, is that first act being maintained. What this episode adds is the completeness. Running the full named roster through her direction, the master builder, Thrymr, Hrungnir, every attested demand for an Asynja in the corpus is refused, and every refusal is answered with the death of the Jotun who made it. And nothing in the surviving corpus records the other outcome. Not one instance of an Asynja actually delivered to a Jotun as the resolution of a demand for her. Set the 2 columns side by side, and the asymmetry stops being subtle. Skadi with Njordr, Gerda with Freya, Bestla with Bor, Jörð with Odin, Járnsaxa with Thor, Gridda with Odin. Every one of those unions puts a Jotun woman inside the Aesir household, and not one of them ends in a killing. Then turn the same movement around, and every attested instance ends in a body. Women cross this boundary constantly in one direction and are absorbed without comment. Women are demanded across it in the other direction, and the answer is a hammer every time. That is not a description of 2 species that cannot mix. Species that cannot mix do not need a rule about which way the brides travel. This is a rule, and a rule needs enforcing, which means somebody has to do the enforcing. The corpus knows exactly who, and it is not shy about him. Start with the horse. Hrungnir rides into Asgard because of a horse race. Odin's Sleipnir against Hrungnir's Gylfaginning runs so hard that the Jotun arrives at the gates of the gods uninvited and does not stop. They give him drink. He drinks a great deal, and the boasting starts. He will carry off Valhall, kill all the gods, and keep Freya and Sif for himself. The words are said out loud in the hall, in front of everybody. The duel follows. Hold on the detail that he was under safe conduct, because it is doing more work than it looks. He is not caught at the wall. He is not intercepted crossing a border. He is inside, served, protected by the convention that protects a guest, which means the convention existed and applied to him and was expected to hold. Whatever the 2 sides are to each other in this corpus, they are near enough for hospitality rules to be a live question. That is not the relationship a story has with a monster. Skaldskaparmal stages the answer at Grjótunagada, and it is the strangest fight in the corpus. Hrungnir stands on a stone shield with a whetstone for a weapon. The Jotnar, wanting a second, build one out of clay, a figure 9 leagues tall, animated with a mare's heart, and they name him Mokurkalfi. The clay man is not the problem. The whetstone is. Thor's hammer and Hrungnir's whetstone meet in the air. The whetstone shatters. A shard of it lodges in Thor's own head, and Hrungnir goes down dead, with his leg fallen across the god's neck, pinning him. And the thing that lifts it off him is a child. Magni, 3 nights old, son of the giantess Járnsaxa, walks up and lifts the dead Jötunn's leg off his father, and is given Hrungnir's horse Gylfaginning for it. The strongest thing on that field, at the end of the corpus's most famous duel, is a 3-night-old boy whose mother is one of the enemy. And the reward for it is the dead Jötunn's horse, the same Gylfaginning from the race that started the whole sequence, handed to a giantess's son. Geirrödr is a different kind of episode, and a harder one. Loki, coerced, lures Thor to Geirrödr's hall without his hammer, without his belt of strength, and without his iron gloves, the whole armory left at home. What saves him is a giantess. Gridr warns Thor what Geirrödr intends, and lends him her own staff, her own iron gloves, and her own girdle of might before he goes on. A Jotun woman arms a god to kill a Jötunn, and the text notes it, and moves along as though it were unremarkable. Everything Thor does in that hall, he does with her equipment. The staff crosses the river, the gloves catch the iron, the girdle carries the strength. Strip Gridr out of the episode, and the god drowns at Vemma, and there is no story. The corpus's most celebrated giant-killing sequence is only possible because a giantess decided to intervene against another giant, and the text does not consider that worth a sentence of explanation. Then the river. At Vaimur, Geirrödr's daughter Gjálp makes the water rise to sweep Thor away, and he crosses on Gridr's staff and stops the flood by striking her with a stone. In the hall, Gjálp and Greip get under his chair and drive it up towards the roof beam to crush him against it. He braces the staff and pushes back, and breaks both their backs. And Geirrödr, from behind an iron pillar, throws a glowing iron bar at him. Thor catches it in Gridr's iron gloves and throws it back, and it goes through the pillar, through Geirrödr, and out through the wall. A feat of strength, told as a feat, with the borrowed equipment of a giantess in both hands. Thrymr is the cleanest of the 3 and the ugliest. The hammer is ransomed for Freyja. The gods send Thor veiled in the bride's place. The hammer is laid in the bride's lap as the wedding gift, and the moment he has it, he kills the groom. Then he kills the hall. Thrymskvida names one of them, an old sister of the giants who asked the bride for a bride gift and got a hammer blow instead of gold rings. Bellows and Larrington render the scene differently in phrasing but identically in content. The household dies at the feast. The poem is careful about the sequence, and the sequence is the point. Thrymskvida opens with the theft already done and no demand yet made. The hammer is simply gone, and Thor wakes and tells Loki. The demand arrives afterwards, and it is specific, the weapon for the goddess, an exchange rather than a raid. The god's answer is not to fight for the hammer. It is to counterfeit the delivery, to send the shape of a bride across the boundary and take the weapon back at the exact moment the transfer is supposed to complete. Even the deception is built around the rule about which way a woman may travel. There are quieter entries on the same list. Himiskvida sends Thor and Tyr to the Jötunheimar for a cauldron big enough to brew ale for Aegir's feast, an errand that begins in hospitality and does not end there. The sources cannot even agree on Hymir's family. Some traditions make him Tyr's father, and Himiskvida and Snorri's prose do not resolve the relation consistently between them. and in Harbardsljóð, Thor boasts to a disguised Odin about killing brides of the berserks on the island of Hlýsi, and gets from the ferryman the reply that he won shame rather than fame by slaying women. The corpus criticizing a giant killing once in its own voice. It is worth being precise about that stanza rather than leaning on it. The translations render the women consistently as brides of the berserks, and identifying them as Jotnar is not something the poem itself does. The rebuke is real. What exactly it is a rebuke about is less settled than a tidy argument would like. Now the concession, and it needs making at full strength rather than at the strength convenient to this episode's argument. Taken together, the Hrungnir, Geirröðr, and Thræmur episodes are the most extensive action narratives in the corpus involving Thor and named Jotnar, and by sheer volume of surviving text, they are the strongest evidence anyone has for reading the Aesir-Jötunn relationship as plain open hostility. That is not a technicality. That is most of the material. The texts linger on these kills the way they linger on nothing else. The clayman, the whetstone in the skull, the child at 3 nights, the iron bar, the daughters in the water, the bride gift. If you know one thing about the Norse gods, you know Thor kills giants, and you know it because the corpus was shaped to make sure you would. Any thesis that pretends otherwise is worthless, so read the list again, not who dies, but what each fight was about. They are about the same thing. Thræmur steals the hammer, then demands Freyja for it. The theft comes first, the demand second, and the demand is the point of the theft. This episode classifies it as an outbound transfer, demanded, refused by deception, and answered with killing. Hrungnir demands nothing while sober. He is inside Asgardr under safe conduct, with a drink in his hand when he claims Freyja and Sif by boast, and it is that claim, not his presence and not his kind, that produces the duel. An outbound transfer demanded, refused by duel, answered with killing. The master builder does not raid anything, he signs. The contract names Freyja, the sun and the moon as his fee for a wall, and the gods kill him rather than pay it once his nature is out. An outbound transfer demanded by contract, refused once revealed, answered with killing. Thiazi is the variant. In eagle form, he coerces Loki into luring Idunn and her apples of rejuvenation out of Asgardr, a transfer that actually completes, briefly. The gods force Loki to bring her back, Thiazi pursues, and he burns on a fire built on the wall of Asgardr. A transfer completed, then reversed, and answered with killing. Be clear about what that classification is and is not. The direction of the exchange is Margaret Clooney's-Ross's observation, credited a chapter ago. Sorting the individual episodes by their trigger and counting the results is this episode's own work, and it is the only genuinely countable claim in the hour. It is also the kind of claim that can come back weak, which is why the count runs in both directions and reports what it finds. The inbound column is the one nobody bothers to tally, and it is the larger of the two. Counting only the episodes where a transfer is genuinely at issue, the inbound side outnumbers the outbound by roughly 2 to 1. So this is not a record of two kinds meeting and fighting whenever they meet. It is a record of traffic, heavy in one direction, blocked in the other, with the blocking done by hand and one weapon. 4 fights, 4 triggers, and not one of them is the mere existence of a jötunn nearby. Something was demanded across a line in the wrong direction, and the answer was force. Enforcement is what a boundary needs when the boundary is not natural. If transfer moved freely both ways, no wall would be required. If it moved one way only because that is simply how the world is made, no wall would be required either. A wall that had held on its own would not need a man walking it every day. Thiazi is the case that shows the mechanism most clearly, because with him the transfer actually goes through. For a stretch of that story, the goddess and the fruit that keeps the gods young are both on the far side of the boundary, and there is nothing the gods can do from inside their hall except get older. What follows is not an expedition against a kind of being. It is a recovery, and the killing arrives at the end of it, attached to the one who took her rather than to his kin. The violence is proportionate to a specific act, and it stops when the act is undone. Nobody marches on Jötunheimar afterwards. That is the rule. Now the misfits, because they are not a footnote, and there are almost as many of them. Geirröðr demands no bride and claims no goddess. He summons Thor into an ambush, and the conflict begins and ends there. On the terms of this census, that is a misfit. His fight is not the enforcement of a refused demand. Vafthrûdnir's fatal wager with Odin is triggered by a contest of knowledge, with no marriage and no goddess anywhere in it. Utgardaloki fits neither half of the pattern, no death, no transfer, only a humiliation, and the gods walk out of his hall alive. Suttungr holds the mead of poetry, which was itself stolen property before he had it, and the gods take it from him by theft rather than by force. Neither the poems nor Snorri's prose record him being killed in return. Aegir hosts the gods at a feast, is never killed, and never named an enemy, and scholars disagree about whether he is a jötunn at all or a distinct kind of sea being. Simek records the ambiguity rather than resolving it. And Bergelmir, alone among named Jotnar, survives the flood of Ymir's blood with his household and is neither killed nor party to any marriage. Those 6 are not marginal figures dredged up to look even-handed. Vafthrûdnir carries an entire Eddic poem. Utgardaloki carries the longest sustained sequence in Gylfaginning. Suttungr holds the origin of poetry itself. Aegir hosts the feast at which the gods assemble. Between them they account for a large share of the best material in the corpus, and none of it is a bride, a refusal, or an enforcement. 2 of them, the wisdom wager and the humiliation in Utgardr, belong to a pattern this episode has not reached yet, and they will matter more there than they do here. Run the whole thing honestly, and here is what it gives. A small group of named episodes fits the enforcement pattern cleanly. Thrimar, Hrungnir, the master builder. Thiazi fits a completed, then reversed variant of it, and a comparable group does not fit the pattern at all. The misfits are roughly as numerous as the clean cases, and this episode is not going to put a tidy total on the screen and pretend the corpus is tidier than it is. What the rule does do is hold exactly where a skeptic would test it first. In the loudest, longest, most repeated fights, the ones a medieval audience would have known by name. The famous violence is triggered violence. The unfamous violence is a mess, a summons, a wager, a lost drinking contest, a theft nobody avenges. The rule is strong. It is not absolute, and this episode will not pretend it is. There is a version of this argument that would look better on screen. 1 clean number, 1 clean pattern, every episode filed without residue. That version would also be false, and it would be false in the direction that flatters the person making it. What the census actually supports is narrower and more useful. Where a jötunn reaches across the boundary for something on the Æsir side, the corpus answers with a killing without exception in every attested case. Where nothing is reached for, the outcomes scatter. A trap, a wager, a lost contest, a theft that goes unavenged, a feast, a survival. That is a boundary with a rule about transfers, not an instinctive war between 2 orders of being. And a rule with exceptions is still a rule. It is simply a rule somebody wrote, rather than a fact about the world. And there is a second flow across that boundary, larger than the first, that nobody counts as a flow at all. The gods build the walls, forge the weapons, and arrange the marriages. But when they need to know something they cannot work out for themselves, they do the one thing a species boundary does not explain. They go and ask a giant. Vafthrudnismal opens with Frigg trying to talk Odin out of the journey, naming Vafthrudnir the mightiest of the Jotnar in wisdom. The hall is in Jötunheimar, and the jötunn describes himself, in his own words, as the wisest of his kind. Odin goes in disguise, and the two of them stake their heads on the outcome. What follows is not a riddle game. It is an examination, and the jötunn passes it. Vafthrudnir answers a long sequence of cosmological questions correctly. The origin of earth and sky, the sun and the moon, the coming of the world's end. He is not out-argued. He is not caught out. He answers everything the chief of the gods can put to him about how the cosmos is assembled. Take the terms of that seriously for a moment, because the framing of the scene is doing an argument's worth of work on its own. The chief of the Aesir does not summon the jötunn, does not send for him, does not have him brought. He travels into Jötunheimar, into the other side's hall, under a false name, having been advised against it by his own wife. He accepts a format in which the other party gets to ask questions too, and he stakes his head, which is to say he concedes in advance that the jötunn might know more than he does. Nothing about the staging treats Vafthrudnir as an inferior order of being. The staging treats him as the acknowledged authority on the subject. Odin wins by cheating the terms. He asks what he himself whispered in the ear of his dead son on the pyre, a question only one being in the world could answer, which is precisely why he asks it, and which reveals who he is. And even the ending is less clean than it is usually told. The poem does not narrate Vafthrudnir's death on the page. A head was wagered, and the jötunn concedes that he has been talking to the wisest of beings, and the usual scholarly reading infers the rest, but the death is an inference, not a stated fact. The second case is property rather than knowledge, and the property is poetry itself. Skaldskaparmal records that the mead of poetry was jötunn property, held by Suttungr and guarded inside a mountain by his daughter, Gunnlod. Odin does not march in and take it. He works under a false name for Suttungr's brother, Baugi, has Baugi drill into the mountain, enters as a snake, and wins 3 drinks of the mead from Gunnlod over 3 nights. Havamal's own stanzas reference the theft, and Gunnlod directly, which matters. This is not Snorri's prose invention, it is corroborated inside the Eddic corpus, and the mead in Suttungr's keeping was itself taken property before he ever held it, which is why nobody's hands are clean in this story, and why nobody is killed for it either. The craft the entire corpus is composed in, the verse-making, the kennings, the art that lets any of this be told, arrives among the gods out of a jötunn's mountain, by fraud and seduction. That is worth stating without ornament because of what it does to the frame. Poetry in this tradition is not a divine gift handed down. It is contraband. The god who is celebrated as its patron obtained it by working for the family under an assumed name, tunneling in, changing shape, and spending 3 nights with the woman who was set to guard it. And the poets who preserved the story, the skalds whose entire profession ran on that mead, knew perfectly well whose mountain it came out of, because Havamal keeps saying so in the first person. There is no version of this corpus that is not, by its own account, using stolen jötunn property to tell you that Jotnar were the enemy. The third case is the one where the gods simply lose. Gylfaginning takes Thor, Loki, and their companions to the castle of Utgarda Loki and sets them contests. A drinking horn they cannot empty, a wrestling match against an old woman, a cat they cannot lift. They lose all of them. And then the reveal, delivered by the winner in his own voice. The horn was connected to the sea, the old woman was old age, the cat was the serpent that circles the world, and the gods came far nearer disaster than they understood at the time. Utgarda Loki tells them so directly, and adds that he will use such tricks again to keep them away. He is not killed for it. There is no duel, no weregild, no return match. The gods are comprehensively outthought, told so to their faces, and sent home. And the manner of the telling is the strangest part. He is not gloating, and he is not pleading. He explains the mechanism of each trick like a man settling an account, tells them how close to disaster they came without noticing, and then says plainly that he will do it again if they return. It is the speech of somebody who has decided the safest available policy towards the gods is deterrence by embarrassment. Thor has no answer to it. There is nothing there to hit. Katja Schultz argued in her monograph Reason that the Jotnar recur across the Old Norse corpus as keepers of ancient knowledge and dwellers in the wilderness beyond the settled world, a role distinct from, and often running alongside, their appearances as adversaries. That frame is hers, and the 3 episodes above are it in action. Sjot goes further on the Odin side, treating the gods' knowledge quests among the Jotnar as a recognizable pattern of initiatory ordeal rather than a set of unrelated adventures. The god goes out, submits to somebody else's format, and comes back holding something he did not have. Taken together with the marriages, Turvilpetra's and Sjot's surveys support treating the Jotnar as a structurally necessary counterpart to the gods in this material, rather than an incidental monster class the stories could have done without. Even Mimir's classification is disputed in the scholarship, and this episode notes the dispute and leaves it there, because that figure's story belongs to another episode entirely. Read together, these 3 reverse the kill list exactly. Here the Jotnar hold the knowledge and the property, the gods have to travel to them, submit to their terms, and in Utgarda Loki's case, lose outright. So the largest thing crossing this boundary is not women. It is knowledge, and it runs inward, and the corpus does not count it as a transfer at all, because there is no ledger for it, no weregild, no bride price, no marriage terms. The gods went to the other side for the shape of the cosmos, for the meed of verse, and for a lesson in their own limits, and they came back carrying all 3. Which leaves one thing to explain. If nothing separates them, not blood, not size, not intelligence, not the ability to have children together, then what exactly is a jötunn? The texts answer that, and the answer is not a fact about a body. A jötunn is a label, and labels can be revoked. Skadi is the daughter of Thiazi, and Thiazi is a jötunn. The genealogy is not in dispute, and nothing about her changes. She arrives armed, takes her settlement, and lives in an unhappy split household. And then Gylfaginning's catalogue of the Asynjur lists her by name, alongside figures born among the Aesir, with no differentiating note whatsoever. No transformation is narrated, no ceremony, no moment where she stops being one thing and becomes another. She was a jötunn, and then she was on the list. Consider how much work a list like that is doing. A catalogue of the Asynjur is not a story. It is a register, the sort of thing a handbook includes, so that a poet knows which names may be used which way. And in a register, inclusion is the entire statement. There is no room in it for formally of the other party, and Gylfaginning does not attempt one. Skadi's father was killed by the people whose goddess list she now appears on, and the list does not mention it. Whatever the boundary is, it is the kind of thing an entry in a catalogue can settle. Jörð is the same move made a generation earlier. Her line runs back through Not to Nörfi, a jötunn dwelling in Jötunheimar. And Snorri's Edda and the Skaldic tradition treat her as one of Odin's divine consorts and the mother of Thor, applying no exclusion at all on the basis of that descent. Again, descent into Jötunheimar, classification among the goddesses, no explanation offered because apparently none is needed. Aegir is the case that proves the category is genuinely unstable rather than merely flexible. Lokasenna's frame has him preparing ale for the Aesir in the great cauldron got from Hymir, with the gods attending as guests, and no hostility anywhere in the scene. He is never killed, he is never called an enemy, and what he is remains disputed, jötunn or a distinct class of sea being, with Simic recording the ambiguity rather than settling it. The dispute is the content here, not an embarrassment to be smoothed over. A being can host the gods for a generation, and the tradition still cannot file him. Notice what the dispute is not about. Nobody is unsure what Aegir does, where he lives, or how he behaves. The accounts are consistent and detailed. The uncertainty is purely about which box he goes in. If Jötunn were a kind of creature, a being this fully described would be trivially classifiable. You would look at what he is and know. Instead, the scholarship inspects the same well-attested figure and cannot agree, because the thing being classified is not a body. It is a standing, and Aegir's standing with the gods is good. There is a stranger detail underneath all of this, and it is easy to miss. Among all the named Jotnar in the surviving corpus, no figure is recorded using the word jötunn to describe himself in direct speech. The term is applied by the narrator or by the Aesir. It is what you are called. It is not, anywhere in this material, what anyone says they are. The wise ones come closest, and they still stop short of the word doing the work. Vafthrûdnir describes himself as the wisest of the Jotnar, which is a boast about rank inside a group, made by a figure the narrator has already placed in it. Nobody in the surviving corpus stands up and offers the category as their own account of themselves, the way the Aesir constantly do. That is thin evidence on its own, and it is offered here as an observation rather than a proof. But it points the same way as everything else in this chapter. The word behaves like an assignment, not like an identity. Armin Jakobsson's book, The Troll Inside You, makes the theoretical version of this point, and it is important to state his subject accurately. He is writing about the troll, and he argues that in medieval Icelandic material, the troll functions as a flexible category of otherness rather than a fixed biological kind. That is his argument about his word. Extending it to the Jötunn is this episode's step, not his, and the extension is stated here as an argument offered rather than a finding reported. The distance between his claim and this one is worth keeping visible, because collapsing it would be the easiest dishonesty available here. Troll and Jötunn are two words with overlapping but separate ranges, and the dictionaries record them separately. An argument proved about one is a hypothesis about the other. What makes the hypothesis worth putting weight on is that the Jötunn material behaves the way his troll material does. The label lands on figures who share no property except position. On that extension, a Jötunn is not a species and not even a stable category with fixed traits. It is a designation, applied and withheld according to who is inside the wall at the time, which brings the whole thing to its stress test. Gylfaginning records Loki as the son of the Jötunn Fabauti, with his mother named Laufey. Jötunn parentage without qualification, and he is not outside the wall. Lokasenna's prose, introduction, and opening stanzas have him among the assembled Aesir at Aegir's feast as an accepted guest. In the poem itself, he reminds Odin that the two of them mixed their blood together as sworn blood brothers in ancient days. Fully Jötunn by descent, seated in the hall, sworn kin to the chief of the gods. Every element of that is the opposite of what a species boundary would produce. Descent is the one thing a biological category cannot be talked out of, and his is unambiguous on both sides. The blood oath is the strongest kinship instrument the material has, and it is sworn between the chief of the Aesir and a Jötunn's son. And the seating is not a curiosity. Lokasenna's own prose introduction places him among the assembled gods as an accepted guest before anything goes wrong. A corpus that thought Jotnar were another kind of creature could not have written that sentence without noticing. And he is the only one who goes the other way. Nothing in the surviving corpus records an A's being reclassified outward into the Jotnar. Skadi is never sent back. Jörð is never reclassified. Loki alone is recorded as both received into the Aesir community by kinship oath, and in the corpus's later material, treated as its enemy, and no other Jötunn-descended figure received among the gods is ever cast back out. What happens to him after that is another episode's story. The fact that matters here is the direction of travel, because that is what the label does. It runs inward freely and outward almost never, and it is applied by the side that gets to do the applying. A category you can be administratively moved into, and once, for one figure, moved out of, is not a biology. It is a decision, renewed, all of which is a reading of a text, so it is worth being exact about what the text actually is, and about who wrote the part that says giant's hardest. The record is two objects, and they are not the same age. One is a manuscript. The primary witness for the Poetic Edda's mythological poems is the Codex Regius, an Icelandic parchment written around 1270. Decades after Snorri's prose, Edda was already composed. Poems remembered and transmitted before that, fixed in ink at that point, by a hand nobody can name. The other is a book with an author. Snorri Sturluson composed his Edda in the 1220s, roughly 2.5 centuries after Iceland's conversion to Christianity. He was a Christian Icelander writing a handbook. Folke's introduction frames Gylfaginning and Skaldskaparmal together as a systematized manual of mythological material compiled for a practical purpose, teaching kenning law to poets who needed to use the old references and no longer knew what they meant. That purpose matters more than it is usually allowed to. A handbook has to be organized. A handbook has to be able to answer the question, what is a jötunn, in a form a student can hold and use in a verse the same afternoon. Think about what that job requires of him. A poet needing a kenning does not need ambivalence. He needs to know which names may stand for which things, and which beings belong to which group, because the whole machinery of skaldic reference runs on stable categories. Snorri is not writing an ethnography of a living religion. He is producing a usable system out of inherited material that was never systematic, for students who could no longer hear the difference between one kind of supernatural being and another. Tidiness is not a bias he happens to have. Tidiness is the commission. And his prologue does something even more drastic to the material. It euhemerizes the Aesir, presenting them as human migrants out of Troy rather than as gods. Christopher Abram situates that move inside a broader medieval Christian Icelandic project of reconciling inherited pagan material with a Christian historical frame, rather than treating it as a private eccentricity of Snorri's. The man systematizing this material had every reason to systematize it, so look for where the tidy class is. It is in his prose, and the clearest instance in the whole corpus is a single phrase. Snorri says the fence around Midgardr was built against the hostility of the giants. That is the enemy class framing at its neatest, a category, a geography, and a wall in one clause. Now the part that is easy to get wrong in the other direction. It would be false to say Snorri invented the enmity, and this episode will not say it. The hostility is in the poems too, and plainly, Thraimskvida has a Jotun steal a god's weapon and demand an Asinja for it, and the Master Builder episode that Völuspá glances at has the same shape. Skirnismal is a curse laid on a jötunn woman until she yields. Harbardsljóð has Thor boasting about killing on Hlysi. The poems are not innocent. Anyone claiming a gentle Eddic world that Snorri soured is arguing with the primary texts. And the same honesty has to run the other way about the poem's age. The Codex Regius is a 13th century object. What stands behind it, how long these poems were carried, in what form, with what changes, is not visible from inside the manuscript, and this episode is not going to pretend to see it. The comparison being drawn here is between two surviving witnesses, one a copied collection of poems and one an authored handbook, not between a pure oral past and a corrupted written present. That second comparison is the one everybody reaches for, and there is no evidence in the record that would settle it. The distinction this episode draws is narrower than that, and it is the whole of the argument. A feud presupposes shared blood, shared history, marriages, debts, and grievances, binding two sides of one kin network together. A taxonomy presupposes two separate kinds. The Eddic poems depict the first. Snorri's systematic prose framing installs the second. He did not invent the hostility, he filed it. And once it is filed, Jotnar here, Aesir there, a fence between, a reader 4 centuries later inherits a classification rather than a quarrel. Then the attribution said plainly, because most of the interpretive frame in this episode belongs to other people, and the argument is worth nothing if it pretends otherwise. The point that giant imports a size connotation the Old Norse word does not carry belongs to Jackson Crawford, made in a lecture resting on older philology in De Vries and the dictionaries. The direction of the exchange, Jötunn women in, Ushinger never out, belongs to Margaret Clooney's Ross from Prolonged Echoes, and it is the load-bearing structural claim of the whole hour. The Jotnar as keepers of knowledge and dwellers beyond the settled world belongs to Katja Schultz from Riesen. The reading of otherness as an administrative category rather than a biological kind belongs to Amund Jakobsson, writing about the troll, with the extension to the Jötunn made here and marked as made here. What is this episode's own is smaller and countable. The census, the complete named roster run through the transfer test, classified, with the misfits reported rather than trimmed. The trigger count that came out of it, and the phrase feud versus taxonomy as the exact name for what Snorri adds and how he adds it. That is the list. It is short on purpose, and it is short because the honest version is short. The obvious objection is that none of this is a discovery. That the Jotnar not being a species is what Crawford says in a lecture, what Clooney's Ross argued in 1994, and what the title of Schultz's monograph announces on its cover. That objection is correct, and it is conceded here, without a struggle. No discovery is claimed. What is offered is the complete roster run through their arguments, the count reported honestly including the cases that do not fit, and one distinction, feud against taxonomy, that names precisely what changes when a poet's material becomes a handbook's category. And there is a boundary on all of it. Every claim here concerns the arrangement and internal consistency of the surviving Old Norse textual corpus and its scholarly interpretation. It is not a claim about what medieval Scandinavians believed, and it is not a claim about a historical people, an ancient civilization, or any real population. The manuscripts are what there is. This is what the corpus we have is shaped to say, and the honest form of the argument stops at the edge of the parchment. So if giant was never a kind of creature, the last question is what actually happened to them, and the texts answer that in 2 stanzas almost nobody quotes. The verdict, then, read across the full-named roster. The Aesir did not defeat the Jotnar. They married them, robbed them, learned from them, descended from them, and then drew a line and spent the rest of the corpus defending it. Read against the genealogies, the marriages, and the knowledge transactions. The relationship in the surviving texts is better described as a continuously enforced kinship boundary than as a war between two separate kinds, because the traffic runs across that boundary in every generation, and the only thing that stays fixed is the direction of the label. Take the 4 pieces in order. The Aesir line is Jötunn on the mother's side from the cosmogony forward, with one non-Jötunn ancestor in the entire genealogy. The ground under all of it is a Jötunn's flesh and bone, with the fence around the inhabited world made from his eyebrows. Poetry, the art the whole corpus is composed in, was Jötunn property in a mountain, and reached the gods through a false name, a drilled hole, a snake, and 3 knights with gunlod. And the knowledge came the same way. The gods traveled to the Jotnar for the shape of the cosmos, submitted to their terms, and in one hall lost every contest they were set. Every one of those is an inbound movement, and none of them is counted anywhere as a transfer, because the corpus keeps no ledger for the things it values most. The direction of the exchange runs inward and stays there. Jötunn women cross into Asgarda and are counted among the goddesses. Nothing in the surviving corpus records the crossing being made the other way as the resolution of a demand. Nothing records an as reclassified outward at all. And the label is administrative. Skadi is born a Jötunn and enumerated among the Arsynjur without a note. Jörð's line runs back into Jötunheimar, and she is a goddess and the mother of Thor. Egger feasts the gods for a generation, and the tradition still cannot agree what he is. Zimmick records the ambiguity rather than deciding it. Loki is fully Jötunn by both parents, seated in the hall as sworn kin, and is the single figure the corpus moves in both directions. A category that can be entered, assigned, and once revoked is not a species. It is a side, which is also the answer to the strongest objection this argument faces. Say it at full strength. This corpus opens with the gods killing the first Jötunn. It does not end in a reconciliation, and calling the two sides one family does not make the killing stop. All of that is true, and none of it is a counter-argument, because a war with in-laws is exactly what a feud is. Feuds run for generations. Feuds are conducted between people who know each other's genealogies, who have married across the line and will marry across it again, and who kill each other anyway, precisely because the debts are legible. What a feud is not is a difference of kind, and a difference of kind is the only thing that would make giant a species word. The world's ending is another episode story, and it gets one sentence here. Völuspá brings the Jotnar to it as an organized host with a named leader and a ship, Naglfar, with Surtur coming from the south, which is what the far side of a feud looks like at its final escalation, and not what a species looks like at all. A wall against a different order of being would not need tending. A wall against organized kin with a genealogical claim needs a guardian on it every single day, which is precisely what the corpus supplies, and only what the corpus supplies, which leaves the 2 stanzas. When Ymir was killed, Gylfaginning says the blood from his wounds drowned the kin of the frost giants, except for Bergelmir and his household, who escaped upon a luda. Vafthrudnismal puts it in the mouth of the wise Jötunn himself. He was laid upon a luda before the flood. Nobody can translate that word with confidence. Some scholars read it as an ark, a vessel of salvation floating above the drowning. Some read it as a coffin, a box for the dead that carries life forward instead. Some read it as a cradle. Some read it as a mill box, a wooden frame for grinding grain. The proposals do not converge, and this episode adjudicates nothing between them. The poem names the object and refuses to explain it. 8 centuries of readers have wanted it to be an arc, because an arc is a shape the mind already holds. The word will not confirm it, and this is not a place to help the text along. And then Vafthrudnismal says the thing that undoes the whole architecture in a half line near the beginning, where anybody could have found it at any point in 800 years. From him, the generations of the frost giants come. From the survivor, which means the corpus states outright on its own second page that the Jotnar were never eliminated and never could be. The line runs alongside the gods from the beginning, and the texts that describe the gods killing them are the same texts that record the line continuing. Every hall the Aesir built, they built on him. Every generation of gods they produced out of his kin. The fence did not hold because the enemy was weak or because the stone was good. It held because someone walked it every day, forever, against a side that was also blood, also family, also the ground underfoot. That is the whole of the case. The genealogies cross the line in every generation. The marriages cross it in one direction and are absorbed without comment. The knowledge crosses it inward and is never counted. The label crosses it inward and for one figure back out. And the only thing that never changes across the entire surviving corpus is who gets to hold the pen, which side does the naming, and which side gets named. This is what the corpus we have is shaped to say. It is not a report on anybody's beliefs, and it stops at the edge of the parchment. They did not win. They renamed themselves, and they built a fence.